morning. Thank you, Mark, for your very kind words. What a powerful and a humbling moment here today to be surrounded both in person and on Zoom virtually from all ends of California and even beyond our borders, to be surrounded by crime victims and crime survivors and community advocates and community leaders. I want to tell you all who is here today. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles, those who have lost their loved ones, and those who have been harmed by devastating violent crime. Women and children who were victimized by sexual predators. Families devastated by gun violence and school shootings. These are the people who I have sat with, I've listened to, I sometimes cried with, who I've advocated for, and who I've represented in courtrooms. Some I have known for decades, others I have recently met as a result of the devastating and reckless actions of politicians and really rogue prosecutors who are dictating policies that destroy victims' rights and endanger public safety. People like Sandy Friend, who's here on Zoom, I hope today, whose 8-year-old son, Michael, was walking home from school one day when he was kidnapped, horrifically sexually assaulted, and tortured to death by a serial killer and a serial sex offender. Like Linda Thompson, whose baby sister Sharon was raped and murdered by another serial killer. Like Phyllis Loya and Will and Marianne Ton, whose sons were military veterans who dedicated their service to this country in honor. And those sons later chose to become police officers to protect their communities. Both their sons were killed in the line of duty here by violent criminals. Like Debbie Boyd, whose daughter Christy was kidnapped and murdered when she left a nearby casino, and for Debbie, who searched for 15 years for her child so she could find her remains and give her a proper burial. Like Dr. Nicole Clavo, who fought for years so her son's killer would serve a just and fair sentence for gunning down her son in the middle of the day on the way to a high school football playoff game. And all the victims of the East Area rapist, upwards of 50 rapes and 13 people who lost their lives. Countless family and friends who were irreparably harmed by one human being. And to Jessica Corday, who's here today on Zoom, who wears her masks every day that simply says, "Fight like a mom," for her son Marquise, because George Gascon cares more about the murder than the mother of a grieving child. Each and every one of these people here today, in person and on Zoom, each has suffered a devastating loss or been impacted by violent crime. Each has their own story. There are thousands more like them across California, from all demographics and from countless different backgrounds. In my 30 years as a career prosecutor, here's what I've learned from sitting with crime victims and crime survivors. The impact of murder and violent crime forever changes them. The way they live their lives, the careers that they may choose, the way they raise their children. It can be something that those unaffected would never even observe or perhaps even understand. How they protect themselves in their own homes, how they look at people standing in line at the grocery store and wonder, is that the man who broke into my home and raped me? How they let their children play at parks. It never goes away. They may bury it, but it never truly goes away. But above all, this is what I have learned from these folks. The sunlight never looks quite the same for them ever again. Last week was National Crime Victims' Rights Week. We asked crime survivors and crime victims to share their stories so that the public and the policymakers could hear the truth, all of it. Like the daughter of Eva Chu. Eva Chu was 7 months pregnant when she was on the way to her doctor's appointment when she was kidnapped in broad daylight and raped and murdered by a career criminal in 1979. Eva Chu's case was the first case I opened when we started the cold case unit here in Sacramento some 20 years ago. Eva Chu's daughter was 2 years old when her mother was killed. Last week, 42 years after her mother was murdered, 42 years, the raw emotions were right there, as if the crime had happened yesterday. We asked crime victims to testify in front of the legislature so that our legislators would be forced to hear the truth. And Karen Gardner Johnson told her story. Karen's husband, John Johnson, was executed in front of her while they walked out of a restaurant by a mass shooter on a rampage here in Sacramento. Karen watched her husband die in front of her eyes, and the last words that she heard from her husband that day were, "Honey, this is going to be a great year." Karen testified last week in front of a legislative committee against a bill that will allow serial killers, baby killers, cop killers, mass shooters out of prison despite having been sentenced by a judge to never get out. Karen Johnson was given a mere 2 minutes to explain to these policymakers that victims suffer their own life sentence as a result of violent crime and the devastating consequences of their loved one being murdered. And guess what happened to Karen Johnson when she spoke up and told her story? When she told the truth, she was ignored and she was abandoned by the policymakers of this state. And those legislators voted for that bill despite her pleas. Karen Johnson is not alone in being ignored and abandoned. She is not alone in suffering the devastating consequences of violent crime. She's not alone in being blindsided by policies, practices, directives of politicians and rogue prosecutors who are wreaking havoc on crime victims and public safety. Countless victims across this state are being abandoned by the very people that we have entrusted to support them and to protect them. But it's not just crime victims who are being ignored and whose lives are being impacted by those we've entrusted to protect them. Each and every Californian is being impacted. In the words of Nelson Mandela, safety and security don't just happen. They are the result of a collective consensus and a public investment. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in our society, a life free of violence and fear. Let me be clear. The newly appointed Attorney General has voted for and supported policies and laws that are not only destroying the rights of crime victims, but are destroying public safety in this state. Here is the truth. California's criminal justice system is in chaos. When policymakers and reckless prosecutors talk tough about protecting all of us, yet they turn around and refuse to take action to protect any of us, that is chaos. When politicians talk tough and tell you they will protect the vulnerable, yet they refuse to make hate crimes, domestic violence, child abuse, human trafficking of a child, and rape of an unconscious woman a violent crime, that is chaos. When politicians pass laws after law or issue directive after directive that erode accountability and public safety, that's chaos. When convicted murderers are celebrating in their prison cells that they're going to get out because of these policies, that is chaos. When billions of dollars are stolen from the state's Employment Development Department and put into the hands of criminals who use that money to buy guns, that is chaos. In the words of Kermit Alexander, whose mother, sister, 8 and 10-year-old nephews were murdered by a gang member in Los Angeles, Kermit said once, quote, "Sometimes justice can't be gentle." But please make no mistake about justice. Yes, at times, and it should, and it must be gentle. I have, and I always will, advocate for alternatives to incarceration. I have and always will be willing to exercise compassion in the right set of circumstances. Community leaders here today stand with me because they know I am committed to that. Long before I was elected as district attorney, I advocated for programs that would not only prevent crime, but enhance the lives of those in our communities, particularly and especially our children. I didn't just talk, I took action. Just a couple of examples. Working to keep kids in our schools, gaining national recognition for that innovation. Using technology to connect our community with critical services. Educating parents and children about the dangers of online sexual predators. I took action to find innovative ways of justice and to protect our community. I am relentless in seeking the truth, regardless of what that truth is. One of the greatest tools in finding that truth and solving crimes is new DNA technology that revolutionizes our ability to both identify the guilty and exonerate the innocent. I am proud to be a national leader in using these tools. The exoneration of Ricky Davis for a murder he did not commit is one of the proudest moments I have as a prosecutor. Ricky Davis spent 15 years in prison, always claiming his innocence. DNA technology not only freed him, but also identified the man that is now charged with the murder of that innocent woman. The community leaders here today to support me do so because they know I don't just talk, I actually take action. Remember that safety and security don't just happen. It takes a collective consensus and a public investment. But when violent criminals are let loose without meaningful accountability, that is chaos. When businesses in the Bay Area are closing by 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they're worried about the violence, that is chaos. When politicians pass laws and support policies that weaken the consequences for gun violence in our communities, that is chaos. When politicians support the release of mass killers or baby killers from prison, but they refuse to listen to the very people that were harmed, that is chaos. An ancient Roman philosopher once wrote, "Often injustice lies in what you are not doing, not just in what you are doing." And when we talk about chaos and injustice in our justice system, let me tell you the truth about the district attorneys in San Francisco and Los Angeles, and what they are doing and what they are not doing. In San Francisco, you have a district attorney, former public defender, who is letting violent criminals out with little oversight or consequences, criminals who go on to victimize again. You have a district attorney who in a 3-month period of time let nearly 90% of those arrested for felony domestic violence go free without any consequences. Abusers who went on to get arrested again for beating women and children again. You have a district attorney who is not using our gun laws to protect the public and hold violent criminals accountable. You have a city where everyday citizens can't leave their cars for 5 minutes without fear of getting ripped off. You have a city where people have to resort to leaving their car door windows down or their doors unlocked and putting notes inside their cars that simply says, "There's nothing in here," in hopes that they will deter the rampant theft. Major conventions are pulling out of San Francisco because their executives are worried that the guests' safety is at risk. Tourists think it's too dangerous to visit that beautiful city. A thriving economy depends on a safe economy. A thriving economy depends on a safe society, and these policies are devastating that city. It is true and it is tragic that San Francisco is suffering, and the newly appointed Attorney General has promised to bring the same types of policies that are hurting San Francisco to the rest of our great state. These are the same policies that are now devastating Los Angeles County at the hands of the same politician who first brought those policies to San Francisco. When the LA District Attorney, who is supported by the newly appointed Attorney General, has to be sued by his very own prosecutors to enforce the law against violent criminals, that is chaos. When that district attorney, who is endorsed by the newly appointed Attorney General, cares more about violent criminals than mothers grieving over their murdered children, that is chaos. And when Jessica Corday is forced to read her son's autopsy report to prepare for a parole hearing, of her son's killer because the district attorney refuses to attend parole hearings and oppose any killer's release, no matter how dangerous he is to the public. That's chaos. And to Jessica Corday here today, if I am fortunate enough to be elected Attorney General, I promise you will not be abandoned at parole hearings. To be clear, the newly appointed Attorney General has promised to bring the same types of policies to the rest of our great state. Policies that are already devastating crime victims and public safety in Los Angeles and San Francisco. In fact, he has spent his career in the legislature supporting laws that only further the chaos. The Attorney General should be advocating for tougher consequences when violent criminals use guns to hurt other people, but instead he's voted repeatedly to weaken those gun laws. The Attorney General should be prosecuting hate crimes with tenacity and vigor and advocating for real consequences when people commit those crimes, but instead he has voted repeatedly for weaker hate crimes laws. When asked what he would do about hate crimes, his answer was that he would set up a hotline. There is a great deal that he could do now to help end this chaos, but history has shown that he won't. One of the most powerful and solemn duties that the Attorney General has is to step in and take over cases from prosecutors when those prosecutors are not protecting Californians. I will exercise that power to protect victims and to support their constitutional rights and to protect all Californians. The appointed Attorney General will not. And the list of the inactions goes on and on and on. I want to end today by making every Californian a promise. If you elect me as your Attorney General, I promise you that I will work relentlessly every day that I'm privileged to serve, to end the chaos in our justice system, to protect victims and to protect those who are accused of crimes, to serve justice to crime victims and their families, as well as those who commit crimes in our communities, and to do everything in my power to keep every Californian safe and to be free to pursue their dreams without living in fear of crime or violence or chaos. Thank you all for those that are on Zoom here today in person, and thank you everyone else for being here. If anybody has just some general questions, I'm more than happy. Otherwise, I'm more than happy to talk to people individually as well.
Question.
Hi.
Laura Cordy with the Sacramento Bee. Thanks
Hi.
for holding this. Californians have approved some ballot measures in recent years that suggest they're going more towards criminal justice reform, lower sentences for certain crimes, increasing parole opportunities. What makes you think that they would vote for a candidate like yourself?
Because I think when you tell the voters the truth about what are the types of things that are getting passed, for instance, if you look back on Prop 20, that was an initiative to tell the public that, listen, things like hate crimes and domestic violence, rape of an unconscious, should be a violent crime. And when we pass laws that no longer allow us to collect DNA to solve crimes and exonerate people, that's something the voters, if they know the truth, I'm quite confident would support. So I think what's important about being the Attorney General is let's just tell the truth, no matter what it is, and let the voters make decisions as long as they have the full facts of what those are.
Anne Marie, you
Yes, sir.
answered that question to some degree, but how much of the public stance on this kind of stuff do people really understand? I mean, a lot of, frequently something happens, the legislature, a bill passes, something becomes law, and someone says, I didn't know about that.
Well,
how much of this is a lack of awareness, and how much of it is an actual sentiment, do you think?
I think a lot of it is actual unawareness. I mean, if people hear the types of bills that are happening right now in the legislature, and they understand, and if we had people like Karen Johnson who had a full opportunity to give more than 2 minutes to tell what happened to her loved one, and that information got out to the public, I definitely think that people would realize what's really happening. And that's why I understand it, because I've been in the business for 30 years. But the volume of laws and bills that are going on in the building across the street is like a superhighway. And it's something that we have an obligation to, and especially as the Attorney General, to make sure that there's a full, fair, and balanced discussion about what these laws do, what they don't do. So a lot of it is education and awareness, and really, and if you look at what's happening in Los Angeles County, I mean, these voters and victims are revolting because they're like, I didn't vote for that. That's not what I wanted.
Would you call yourself the alternative to what's out there now?
I call myself the real deal. That's what I call myself. I've been in the business for 30 years. I believe 100% in balance in the system. I believe that people deserve opportunities to get out of prison and become productive members. I have worked with community leaders in this community to make sure we give them those opportunities. I also believe strongly that violent criminals should be held accountable. And I will, as I said, work tirelessly to achieve all of those goals. All right, I guess that's a wrap then. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. Thank you, everybody here. I appreciate it very, very much.